Hey everyone, thanks for joining in today. Welcome to Miller Mindset. It's brought to you by BitLyft. This is where we cut through the cybersecurity noise, share brutal truths. It's one of the reasons why I love who we have on today's show. But we are going to arm you with strategies that are going to keep you safe and strong. And today we're going to dive into some real world trenches and stories around CMMC and how you can come out on top through CMMC. So without further ado, I am excited to have Robert on with us today, emphasizing his extensive experience in the military, cybersecurity sector, CMMC. I think this guy eats, breathes, and sleeps CMMC. And so we'll find out here today on today's show. But without further ado, Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to help expand the understanding of the ecosystem. So anytime you're ready.
Yeah. Well, tell me your last name again and how you pronounce it.
McVay.
McVay. All right.
Yeah.
McVay. It's very bougie kind of term, you know.
It's a Scot, so.
You know, you and I have talked several times, and I'm truly grateful that you're joining me today on the Miller Mindset Show. One of the areas that you and I kind of talked about before, and I was like, hold up, wait for the show before we dive into this deep, because I didn't want to spill the popcorn in the lobby, so to speak, but was, breaking down CMMC. We're here. It's May 15th, 2025, right? There has been a lot of CMMC changes and, differences in the ruling over the last 6 months, 12 months, right? Even beyond that. But, in December came out some ruling. Further on, I think in February, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in February there was some additional rulings. But for the people that watch this recording later on and sharing with the community, just help me break down today a little bit about the CMMC assessment process. People that are like starting to get ready, right? I think we hear from a lot of people that they are starting to get ready because obviously there's a deadline in the future.
Right. So the simplest way to do this, and we talk to most organizations about this, is, everybody who went to high school, everybody went to college, clearly understands, you typically had that one class that had like a thesis paper or a major project. And the one thing I like to remind people of is your assessment is like turning in that thesis paper. Unfortunately, it's not done when it's done, because then you might keep writing the next iteration never stops. But the analogy here is that organizations that need CMMC, guess what? You've known it since 1 January of 2018. The requirement for NIST 800-171 Rev 2 to be implemented in an organization, a SPURS score, has existed for 7 years now. CMMC 1.0 came about to try and force the issue and create third parties doing it, because it was always self-affirmation and self-attestation or self-assessment. And those of us who have children clearly understand that my son saying his room is clean is vastly different than my wife saying his room is clean. So I always use that analogy. But The short answer is that you should have been preparing for your assessment all along. Your assessment should not be a goal. And your assessment should not be your definition of, hey, once we get certified, we're good. Because once you get certified, all the certification says is that on that particular time frame, that day, you demonstrated compliance with NIST 800-171. However, 12 months from now, you got to self-assess and self-reaffirm to SPURS that, hey, I'm still doing it. So it's like pulling that thesis paper out, updating it, and handing it in for the next class. And then the next class, and then the next class. And it's a repeating event. So it's never an ending thing. However, the one thing that everybody seems to be wrapped around is, I got to get through the assessment. No, what you really need to do is you really need to implement NIST 800-171. You need to implement the controls. You need to understand the assessment objectives. You need to be doing these practices. You need to not only just be able to say it and do it in front of the auditor, but more importantly, you need to do it on a day-to-day basis. Okay. My showing up and assessing, yes, you have multi-factor turned on, is only as valid as long as I'm standing in your facility or looking over your shoulder at your GPO saying MFA is turned on. 5 minutes after I leave, you could turn it off.
Yeah.
So the analogy here is that this is a case of you've got to build the CMMC requirements into your day-to-day activities. Make, like you said, you got to breathe it, you got to eat it, you got to sleep it. And then when I show up, all I'm validating is, hey, you're doing it. That's it. The other analogy I'd give you is it's like getting a car inspected. I don't know if here in Texas, we used to have car inspections up until this year. I used to live in Virginia where you used to have to get your car inspected and emissions tested.
Yep.
Well, if your car is well maintained, you do the routine maintenance, you check to make sure the engine is running right, you check your oil, etc. The state inspection, it's no big deal. Now, if you ignore all of that maintenance on your vehicle, you don't do any maintenance on your vehicle for a whole year, don't be upset and don't be surprised when you show up for the state inspection, you don't pass because, oh, by the way, your emissions is not working because, you've got a spark plug that's, 10 years old and it's misfiring or whatever it is. The analogy is that the assessment is not the end game. The assessment is just merely a check in motion. Say, are you ready?
Yeah. Now I'm gonna ask you this question because we had somebody like about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We were talking to a prospect. She was in the IT department, but she could not get her management and ownership of the company bought into the mere fact that they needed SIM and log management and these things that are listed inside of NIST 800. And so we asked her, well, how are you going to certify? And she goes, oh, well, we're self-assessing, self-attestation. It's a hard word for me to say, self-attesting. And I said, well, ma'am, in all honesty, though, you're lying, because in my opinion, I said to her that you're self-attesting that you're doing these things, but you know for a fact yourself that the organization is not doing them. And she said, I know, but she goes, leadership will not spend the money.
Okay, well, there's 2 pressure relief valves for that individual there. First and foremost is the fact that with the new 32 CFR rule and the 48 CFR for DFARS updates coming out, the big piece that'll impact them there is that a director or officer of the organization must go into SPURS and must self-affirm for the organization. And in doing so, if you read the SPURS comment, they are accepting personal liability under the False Claims Act, that what they're saying is true to the best of their knowledge. So if the organization's directors, and so we're talking an officer, so like the COO, the CFO, the CEO, somebody with the word O in their name, or somebody with the word director at their name that has the responsibility or the authority to speak for the company, once they sign that SPURS affirmation, is what they're calling it now instead of attestation, but affirmation, once they sign that affirmation, that organization, even if they're not a prime to the government, becomes subject to the False Claims Act and becomes subject to the DIBCAT conducting what's called a SPURS validation assessment. So there's that piece. So, if they attest that, or they affirm that they're 110 and the DIBCAT comes in and does a SPURS validation and they turn out to be 101 or 50 or whatever, it doesn't matter. At that point, they have a problem on their hands because now they have essentially lied on a government document. There is actually a very recent False Claims Act where an organization did exactly that. The organization went in, they self-affirmed that they were 110. They had a third party come in and assess them. The third party came in and said, hey, you're not a 110, you're actually a negative 142. Because remember, it goes from negative 203 to 110. The third party assessor came in and basically said, hey, you're a negative 142. And they did that like in, the organization, I think I'm paraphrasing, the organization, affirmed in like March of, I believe, like 21 that, hey, what numbers scored this. In July or August of that year, the third party came in and says you're negative 141. or 142. The following March timeframe is when they finally updated their score, but somebody in their own organization had reported them to the DOJ saying, hey, we affirmed in March that we were a 110, but in July or August, we had a third party come in and says we're negative 142, and the company intentionally chose not to update the score. Now, that resulted, if you go online, just do DOJ, just type in DOJ, False Claims Act, CMMC, or False Claims Act Cybersecurity, you'll see it. They got a $4.5 million fine for falsifying their records.
Wow.
Now, that's the meat and potatoes of it. That's what's going to hurt the organization. But the other piece they need to consider, though, in doing so is that now there is the ability for the federal government to debar them from government contracts, number one. Number two, when that judgment came down, even if they're not a prime, now in this case, the organization was a prime, but even if they weren't a prime and they reported that, the ecosystem is too small. So not only did they get the fine, but, that's going to cause the DOJ to notify all their upline customers that, hey, by the way, one of your suppliers just falsified documents, lied to the government, accepted monies from the government, was issued a fine. The DOJ can't debar them, but the Department of Defense acquisition executives can go in and debar them and say, you're no longer allowed to bid on government contracts. Now, that means the government won't issue a contract to them. But let's be honest, if you're one of the big, if you're a Lockheed, Raytheon, one of those big companies, and you get told about a supplier downline from you that did it, you're going to send a notice through your whole supply chain saying, hey, this company has a bad habit, so we're going to avoid using them. Or if you use them at your own risk. So, that's not necessarily a place the organization wants to be in. The other component that individual could also do is take a look at IBM and Verizon both do this every year, and IBM's report is out this year, and it's the IBM Cost of a Cybersecurity or Data Breach. They publish it every single year in March, April timeframe. The 2024 version just came out this last April. What they do is they look at the statistics for an entire year. They compare them to the last 10 years they've been doing this. And what they're showing is that the cost of a cybersecurity breach is anywhere from $4.5 to $9.8 million for what they call non-mega breaches, under 100,000 records. That's the bulk of the DIB. They're small companies. They're in that space. Even the moderate-sized companies are still in that space. So the question for them is, what kind of problem do you want? Ideally, like in this one company on the False Claims Act, the false claim is the end of their problem. But let's say they got breached at the same time. Now they got a $4.5 million judgment against them by the Department of Justice, number one. But what happens when they get breached and they have to go through the remediation and the protection? Now they're out another $4.5 to $9 million. So this could be a $13-15 million pain. So when your senior leadership says, well, we're not convinced that it's worth it, I get this all the time. What's my ROI on cybersecurity? I tell most organizations that I consult with in this space, this is, well, the ROI is you can pay $4.5 million to be breached, or you can pay something less of that to hopefully prevent yourself from being breached.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of you're going to pay for it one way or the other. It's like car insurance.
Yeah.
You either pay for the car insurance, and hopefully when you have the accident that, totals your car, or you total somebody else's car, your personal liability is limited to your deductible. Hey, it's a great thing. Or don't pay the insurance, and when you have a car accident, you total your car and their car. Now you're out $100,000-200,000 in money, medical bills, et cetera, et cetera. It just all builds. So
yeah,
think of cybersecurity as an insurance policy to keep a lot of bad things from happening.
Yeah. I was just astonished at the amount of people that we have talked to in the cybersecurity space so far, and still are sort of, now there is quite a few people that are on track. They're going down the road and they're doing the right thing. But there's still a lot of people out there in the manufacturing space. They think small of themselves, and they think like, why are we a target? They think, I only produce this, fill in the blank, and so they don't want to spend $50,000 or $100,000 or $200,000 a year in, cybersecurity stuff that they need to fulfill. And I'm just throwing out those numbers based on, a lot of these organizations are 100 people, 200 people, 300 people in size. They're not uber big. But they're big enough to become a cyber, like And what I tell them is cybersecurity. The criminals, it's a spray and pray. I mean, they spray the malware, the credential dumps, they're picking up credentials. And so it's not necessarily that you're small. It's not necessarily that they were even targeting you. It's a mere fact that, a lot of the 80 to 90% of the cybersecurity activity that we see out in the space is literally you got hit by somewhat kind of an accident, meaning that you weren't targeted. But all that to say that this is still good hygiene. I mean, every day you still, like you said, maintain your car, you maintain your home. I like to ask people, well, did you walk out the door this morning and you left your wife and kids at home, and did you lock the door on the way out? Or if you didn't lock the door, did you leave the door open? You know what I mean? It's just like common sense stuff of keeping your loved one safe and secure. Well, if the business is your loved one, you like the revenue that you're generating, you like the paycheck you're taking home, you like your health insurance, and you like all the things, and then all of those employees that are there depend and rely on that place to be alive and well, then you need to take care of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would offer that's where CMMC, that's where people get really wrapped around the axle around CMMC and NIST 171 Rev 2 or Rev 3. They are exactly what you said. They are the basics that we should be doing for home defense. Okay, you're not protecting Fort Knox. You're not protecting, a nuclear weapon site or anything like that. You're protecting your home. And so, when people say, what is CMMC? My analogy there is like you said, when you leave for work in the morning, you close your garage with, a garage door opener that's got 1 million random generated codes, so it can't be repeated. It can't be snatched up and reused. We all have locks on our front door, back door. Hopefully we have windows that have locks on them. Maybe we have an alarm system that we connect up to the bulk of the windows on the first floor, maybe even the second floor, or we have 1 or 2 cameras or 3 or 4 cameras around the house that, like a Ring camera, it's just the basics,
Basics.
You wouldn't, the average person who lives in a city, you would not just walk out, leave your front door standing wide open and, go to work all day long or go on a vacation for a weekend. You're not going to do those things. It's hey, I got ready to leave in the morning. I made sure the windows were locked. I made sure the back door was closed. The dog was in, the cat was out. I made sure the garage door closed properly before I drove away. And then I armed the alarm system. Okay. That's CMMC in a nutshell. Because we're not defending Fort Knox. We're not defending nuclear weapons. We're not defending nuclear facilities. We're defending unclassified, but information that we just don't necessarily want out in the wild. To your earlier comment about small businesses, Google, Ponyman, MITRE, and Gartner publish reports just about every single year in this space. And the attacks are no longer going against the large businesses. Nobody 100%. Is attacking. There are nation states that are still attacking the Department of Defense. It's going to happen till hell freezes over. I get it. However, they're no longer targeting and attacking the Department of Defense because they know that the Department of Defense spends $1 billion a year in protecting its networks. That they have, security operations centers, 27 network security operations centers globally. They have this protection level around them. It's like, if you want to, John Dillinger, when he was asked, why do you rob the banks? He says, that's where the money is. He didn't rob Fort Knox because getting into Fort Knox would require, a small army. You rob the local mom and pop bank that has, the retiree with a handgun who's their only defense. So that's where the cyber criminals are going. Look at the Target hack from, almost 10 years ago now.
10 years ago.
Target hack. They attacked the HVAC provider for a local Target store. They didn't attack Target. They attacked the HVAC provider. In our case, in CMMC and the Department of Defense, it's even worse because the contracts that get awarded by the Department of Defense are matters of public record. So as a result, when the government issues a contract about the new F-35 or an upgrade to the F-35, or, hey, you were issuing a contract on the nuclear propulsion for a particular naval vessel, etc., those contracts get broadcast publicly. We announce it in our zeal to be transparent. The Department of Defense budget, almost 99% of it is made publicly available. It's a matter of public record. So it's not hard to say, hey, this company just won this contract. And then you can start trying to figure out who their supply chain is. And you start going down that list, and you don't attack Boeing. You don't even attack, McVay Industries at the second tier. You don't even attack Miller Industries at the third. You attack, Hanna Industries at the fourth tier. Why? Because all those companies, when you get down to the fourth tier, now you're talking a company maybe 40, 50, 100 people is big. And the probability that they're spending a lot on cybersecurity is pretty low. So you attack them because they might have the information you need. And then from there, you can work your way up the chain if you wanted to. But you don't go after, the big boys, because the big boys have a lot of defenses that they've been spending a lot of money on.
This leads really well into something that just came to my mind, which was you kind of touched on this a couple minutes ago, and I want to bring this back around, is that my favorite word, CUI. It's kind of a fun word to say, but controlled, unclassified information. And for the most part, we're protecting, like you said, we're protecting unclassified information. We're not protecting classified information, and we're not protecting Fort Knox. Like you said, the DoD is spending $1 billion or more a year on protecting that. But as you think about, what's your perspective on these mock assessments? Because smaller organizations think about okay, we need to spend less money. We can't spend $50,000 or $100,000 on an assessment from a huge firm. But what's your thoughts on these mock assessments that I'm kind of hearing about in the space? That.
Let me ask you this: you prepare your own taxes, or do you go to somebody to do your taxes for you every year?
Oh, I go to a subject matter expert to prepare my taxes.
So let me ask you this. You got all your paperwork ready for your taxes. You think you're ready. You call your CPA. You say, hey, I want you to do a mock tax return for me. I want you to go through the process and do it exactly like you would my tax return. Prepare everything. Let me look at it. And then I'll come back to you and we'll do the real tax preparation.
My thoughts are, is he charged me twice?
Exactly. Would you do that? I mean, would you want him to do it twice? Probably not, because, and so number one, that's part one that annoys me with these mock assessments. The other problem is that the terminology mock assessment, CMMC is horrible for creating a lot of CMMC unique terminology. And every time CMMC creates these unique terminologies, other people create their own versions of them, and we start creating confusion in the ecosystem. The word mock assessment appears nowhere in 32 CFR. The word mock assessment appears nowhere in the cap for C3PAOs. It just doesn't, the word doesn't exist. Every time I've heard mock assessment and somebody says, well, a mock assessment is conducted to the same standard, to the same level as a full assessment. So when I hear that, what that tells me is a C3PAO is that somebody is going out there, they're putting a CCA and a lead CCA against it and a quality control person against that assessment. They're doing that assessment. They're doing all 110 controls, 320 assessment objectives. They're looking at all the policies, all the procedures, all the tools, all the evidence. They're doing all the interviews. They're doing all the examination and testing. Okay. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
Once, pay the full fee for an assessment, get the assessment reports for it, and then turn right around and do it again.
Yeah.
That makes no sense. Now, what often happens is you hear some companies, and I'm going to get charged with heresy for saying this, some companies say, well, it's like the company having to do their internal assessment. That's right. And that's the problem that I see as a third-party assessor with a lot of background in this space, is that an organization, especially when ISO 17020 kicks in for your C3PAOs, an organization under ISO 17020 or ISO 17021 for certifications, an organization has to conduct an internal assessment or an internal audit, a management review before they do a third-party audit. And what it's meant to do is to ensure that the organization has done their due diligence and that their leadership has looked at it and said, yes, we are ready to spend the money on a third-party assessment. That's an internal assessment. If Smithers is asked to conduct an internal assessment for a company and does an end-to-end assessment like that for them, we cannot, by the ISO standards, we cannot then turn around and be the third-party assessor, because that's deemed grading our own homework. because we came in, we assessed them, we told them, we gave them all the problems and what needed to be fixed. And then when we come back, we're basically reassessing our own work from the perspective. Now, a lot of the C3 goes, well, we don't give them remediation. We only give them guidance. We don't give them consultative. It doesn't matter. What you've done is you've blurred that line on an internal assessment. So to me, that's a problem for a C3PAO that conducts mock assessments. Now,
it's a conflict of interest.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure it's so much a conflict of interest. It's a little bit of an impartiality problem. There's definitely some conflict.
I can see that. Yeah.
But the circle back is that I go back to the company is, why would you pay for the same assessment twice? Why? I mean, now, if you have that kind of money to afford 2 assessments back to back, I would offer take that mock assessment money you're spending and go spend it on some really good cybersecurity features.
Yeah.
Don't spend it on. Now, there is a requirement in both the 32 CFR and in the CAP to conduct a pre-assessment, or as it's, phase 1 is called the pre-assessment plan. In reality, it's a readiness assessment. It's a look at your documentation only. It's not a deep inspection of your evidence. It's basically looking at your SSP, your policies, your procedures, your tools, and generally how you say you're doing it. And what that's designed to do is to look at how the organization has put together the who, the what, the how, and the why, and say, yes, generally there's sufficiency of evidence here or sufficiency of information. We don't necessarily and shouldn't under that, because it's phase 1 is equivalent to an ISO stage 1. It's a documentation review. Are you ready to proceed to the full assessment where we're going to actually do the interviews, we're going to ask for the evidence, we're going to do the examination, we're going to do the test? I would recommend to a client, you should only pay for that once.
Yeah.
If you pay for it twice, I have to beg the question, why are you paying for it twice?
Yeah.
Not to mention, if the company comes in and says, well, we will do the mock assessment to the same standard, but then we'll reduce the duration for your assessment on the back end, I'm going to argue at that point, that's a conflict of interest. Because if you conducted the mock assessment to the full standard and to the full capability, why was it not registered with the Department of Defense the way an assessment is supposed to be? So when you say you're doing it here and then you're reducing it here, I kind of scratch my head and go, guys, you're playing a really dangerous game on impartiality and conflict of interest.
Yeah.
But more importantly, why would you pay for an assessment twice?
Yeah.
If you didn't need to.
That's really good. And you're bringing up something that I wanted to talk about today, which I think the space needs to hear this from somebody like you is like, why is it so important for companies to understand the difference between a compliance checklist and a real assessment?
Well, because compliance has never equaled cybersecurity.
Ooh. Can you say that again?
Yeah. I used to be an authorizing official in the government, and compliance does not equal cybersecurity. Compliance just means on that one particular day, I demonstrated and proved that I was doing things as I said I was doing them.
There it is.
Yeah.
You could take that, you could underscore it, you could share that with the rest of your company, because compliance is not cybersecurity.
No.
I'm glad that somebody finally said that.
But I will offer, though, cybersecurity without confirmation of compliance is a delusion. Because just because an organization says, we're doing everything right, again, I go back to the teenager saying my bedroom is clean and my homework is done. Okay, good. I'm glad you think it is. Now let's go trust but verify. Let's actually inspect what you're saying to do. The people that get in trouble with CMMC are the ones that go in and they read the regulation, or they read the NIST standard 171 and the 171 alpha, and they say, okay, this is just a checklist. I have to have multi-factor. Okay, I turned on multi-factor. I have to have, a firewall, and I want it, and they go through the checklist and they do that, and they focus on the technology. Okay, let me help you here. The bulk of my assessment of an organization, the bulk of any of our assessors doing it, is not focused on the actual technology. I don't care if your multi-factor is Duo or Okta or OTP or Entra. I don't care what solution you chose. It's not a technical check of that. What it is I'm looking for, do you have a policy, a procedure, and a method of ensuring that when somebody joins the organization, you make sure that their accounts get set up, you make sure that they get access to only the information that they need to. You have a process and a policy around how to, provision account, suspend account, deprovision account. And more importantly, do you follow that process? That's really what it comes down to. And that's the same thing in ISO. ISO is tell me what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. Show me how you do it. Now prove to me you do it. So when I look at that provisioning of an individual, I'm going to pick, I'm going to say, give me the last 10 people that join the organization. And, that's if they're like a 100-person organization. The last 10 people that join the organization are McVay and Jason. We all joined. Here it is. Got it. I'm going to look at it and say, hey, when McVay joined the organization, how did it proceed? Well, McVay joined the organization on the 1st of January. On the 2nd of January, HR sent the notice to IT. IT said we're provisioning his account. IT reached out to his supervisor and said, what access does McVay need? McVay needs access to, system A, B, and C. Does he need access to the CUI system? No. McVay doesn't get access to the CUI system. And they go on. They build my account. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to test it. I'm going to come back and say, okay, show me the list of authorized users who have access to the CUI system. They pull up the list. It's got Jason Miller on it. It's got Robert McVay. I'm going to look at it and say, well, wait a minute. When you provision McVay's account, you said McVay wasn't authorized to see CUI. Why does he have CUI? It's a pretty big disconnect because something broke down in your policy and procedure. Because it really is. And that's the original CMMC 1.0 was about the maturity of the organization and basically it was the old CMMI, the CMMI, where they were really looking at the repeatability. Is the organization documented? Is the organization repeatable? Is the organization optimizing? They were just looking for that repeatability. Does the organization have repeatable processes that they follow? Because that leads towards cybersecurity. Do you have a process that says every month we will review all the audit logs to determine, were there any anomalies? And if there were anomalies, we have a process to review them, do a little further analysis. Okay. Organization says they do that every month. I come in as the auditor. I look at it and say, okay, show me the last 3 months of audit reviews. Well, it's been kind of busy. We haven't had an opportunity to do them in the last 90 days. So your process, your procedure, your policy are broken.
Yes.
Well, no, we just haven't had time. No. You said you had a policy and a process and a procedure that said every month you were going to review them. So for the last 90 days, you have no idea if you had any incidences. Well, our SOC, no, your own policies and procedures say this is what you're supposed to do. Now, we can also have the case where the organization actually does that and a vulnerability still gets through. That can happen. And that's typically what does happen because I'm not necessarily grading the adequacy of your process. I'm just asking, do you have a process? Do you follow it?
Yeah.
So, if the company says, yeah, we reviewed the audit logs and here's our documentation, we reviewed them every month for the last 9 months. There's no breaks in it. Okay. Did you have any anomalies? No, we didn't have any anomalies. Can I see at least one of the reports? I'm going to ask for that. I'm going to look at the detail of it. Like, okay, I might say, hey, you had this time space violation for Jason on the 3rd of March. Did you investigate it? Well, as my wife says, no conversation starts with well ever goes well. So when so I'm going to ask them, I'm going to ask the organization, hey, you have a time space violation. How is it that Jason Miller logged in at 5:00 in the evening from, Manhattan, but Jason, according to the travel reports, was in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
What's up here? Now, it could be something as simple as, oh, yeah, that's because Jason is using one of our remote VPNs and it VPNs back to an office in New York. Oh, okay, I get that. Or, well, we don't know. Okay, is this something that your own policies and procedures say you should invest? If they have a procedure that says we will investigate all time space violations, okay, do you have that? That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for the individual technology. So if you're focused on the technology, that's important. But if you're focused only on technology, you're going to fail the assessment because the assessment is not around the technology. It's around the policy, the process, the procedures, and the tools you selected to do it.
Well, Mr. McVay, I want to move on to this one.
Okay.
My favorite word, cooey. We had this conversation. I'll call it. It was I think a friendly debate a couple weeks ago with another prospect that we were talking with. They came to our website, set a meeting with us, blah, blah, blah. And we got into this discussion around, does the SIM and does the log management tool, and something that you were just referring to, which is audit logs, ingest CUI, or classified or controlled unclassified information. And my statement back to them is we do the best that we possibly can to try and make sure that CUI does not come into your SIM or your log management tool. But there is this big session that were like, well, how? I mean, isn't my IP addresses, my usernames, my MAC addresses for our laptops and all of the makeup of our company, isn't that CUI? And I was like, oh boy, this is going to be a good question for Robert. So, Robert, what are your thoughts on that?
CUI is the government's information that the government has deemed is controlled unclassified information. Important piece there. It's the
like
government
exclamation point.
It's the government's information.
Yeah.
My information about the IP addresses, my usernames, my documentation on my system is set up. None of that is CUI. It is all company information. Now, it may be considered confidential or proprietary to the company. That's fine. But it is not controlled unclassified information. Controlled unclassified information. The only organization that can designate something as controlled unclassified information is the Department of Defense or the government. So, here's a really good example of where we play in this space as CPPOs every day. When we do an assessment of the organization, the 32 CFR and the CAP state that the information that we create around your assessment and the actual assessment information is not CUI or CY, but as a C3PAO, we are directed to treat it as if it was CUI, protect it in the same manner we would use it as CUI. Now, when we take the information about your assessment, we upload it into EMAS, and it goes into EMAS, and then it becomes government information at that point when you give it to them. At that time, your assessment information that is stored in EMAS becomes CUI because they mark it as CUI propin, meaning it's proprietary to the organization, but it's a form of CUI, but it's in their system, and therefore they designate it as CUI. So at that point, any communications the government has downward with us or with the company about the information that was loaded into EMAS, from their perspective, they're now treating it as CUI because they've marked it as CUI. Now, the company that gets assessed, let's say they did an assessment for BitLyft and they said, okay, you guys, here's we need some additional information about you. When you send them the information to the government, you don't have to treat it as CUI because it's not CUI if it originates with you.
Right.
And so if they send you your own SSP down and it says CUI on it, that's actually an overclassification and mismarking because your SSP is not CUI. Your SSP is company proprietary maybe, but it is not CUI. Now, as I said before, you don't have to treat it as CUI because you're the owner of it. I, as a C3PAO who's doing your assessment, I do have to treat it as CUI, but it is not CUI.
Yeah.
So when somebody says, hey, we're doing all this, again, if the government does not state that it is CUI and it doesn't originate with the government, then it's not CUI. Now, there is the potential that if I receive a contract and I'm a prime or a sub-tier and I create information about, so let's say I receive information and the information is controlled unclassified information, and I've been told to build an interface for that particular piece of equipment that was designated as CUI. And I build the interface. And the government informs me, or the security classification informs me, the interfaces or controls associated with this item fall under CUI. Okay. I can mark it initially as this could be CUI, but the actual marking has to come from the federal government. Now, should my organization mark it and treat it as CUI, stating, that we've done it as a derivative of the original class or the original categorization of the data? Yes. But is it actually CUI? Again, not until it goes back up to the government. The government says this is CUI. There is a laundry list of people who have arguments in this space. I go back to the plain language interpretation in CFR 2002.4, and I go back to the plain language interpretation of 32 CFR Part 170. And it clearly states that controlled unclassified information is information designated as such by the government. So anything I derive in my organization is not CUI. Anything about my organization is not CUI.
Yeah. Well, I think that hopefully helps a lot of people out there. I think that I hope that people read this and share this, watch this and share this, and just really make sure that they get that plain English
Yep.
explanation out there.
Well, and if in doubt, reach up to your contracting officer, whatever people you are. Say, hey, I've got information. Is this really, I think it is CUI. Is it CUI? Or, we've seen many cases where we see contracting officers that are playing the CYA game and they mark everything with the 252, 204, 7012. This is CY. They send it down. I had a contractor that reached out to us and said, hey, I need you to come do a level 2 assessment. We started the process. We started the scoping. I said, okay, what CUI are you handling? Done. Well, what do you make? We make pop rivets. Okay, like what kind of pop rivets? Aluminum pop rivets for aircraft. Okay. And you have a contract. Yes, we have a contract marked CUI. Okay, what's the product? It's a type of aluminum 20 millimeter pop rivet. Okay. Is it commercially available? Yes. Could I come to your website and buy 1,000 of them? Yes, you could. I said, okay, that's not CUI. And he's like, well, what do we do? I said, well, you need to go back to your contracting officer and ask your contracting officer to clearly articulate what is CUI in this contract, because right now it sounds like it's a commercial off-the-shelf item and COTS are not CUI. I said, did they give you instructions to deliver them to, the PM for the F-35? No, I'm delivering them to an upline supplier. Okay. Is that supplier on the DoD contract for the F-35? No. I said, are these going to be used in F-35? I don't know. It's like, okay, it's a COTS item, so push back. So,
yeah,
there's a lot of organizations that are just going, oh, well, I got CUI, I got to do it. No, if you don't believe it is CUI, if you think it is COTS, or you think that it should not have been marked CUI, push back. Tell them, hey, give me the definitive justification as to why this is CUI. Contracting officer to contracting officer. And we've seen a couple, like in that case, they pushed back, and a couple weeks later, the contracting officer wrote back and said, we have determined that you are not handling CUI, that the information contained in this contract is COTS. Please ignore, the following sections of the T's and C's we delivered you.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's exactly what they needed.
That is perfect. And you're kind of getting into one of my questions that I wanted to get into, which were like common pitfalls and how to avoid them. So what are some of the costly mistakes of not being properly prepared for an assessment, including the misconception that the process is just technical controls? And you kind of covered that a little bit, but I wanted to just kind of, if you had any more thoughts or anything else to say there around those common, pitfalls.
So the first and foremost, the biggest pitfall is not actually determining, do you have CUI? Every time I engage with a client, one of the first questions after we get over the pleasantries and, I'm you're, et cetera. My first question always is, are you currently handling CUI? Do you have a contract that requires you to handle CUI, or are you planning to handle CUI in the future? And I ask that question because if the company is currently handling CUI or has a contract requiring the handling of CUI, then I'm automatically triggered to say, okay, you understand that as of 1 January 2018, you should have been compliant with the DFARS 252, 204, 7012. Are you doing that now? And you'd be amazed the number of companies go, no, we're not. Why not? We're waiting for the rule to become official. I said, do you understand that the 252, 204, 7012 has been official since 1 January of 2018? That is in your contract. That is a TNC in your contract, and you have been signing a SPURS self-attestation affirmation for 7 years, if that's how long your contract is, or whatever that time is. You've signed that contract. You have been saying for X number of years you're compliant, at which point the conversation gets really uncomfortable.
Because you basically just told them for the last 7 years that they were self-affirming.
Yeah.
And
they've been tap dancing. They've been playing the FA, it was FAFO. They've been playing the FAFO game.
Yeah. Trending now on.
We got a lot of clients that say, well, we're going to wait till the rule is final and official. Okay. All the rule does when it's final and official says you have to have a third party. It has nothing to do with your doing it and being self-assessment, self-affirmation, self-attestation. That's been the law of the land for 7 years now. That's pitfall number one. Number two, the other one that gets companies into trouble is thinking that they read the NIST 800-171 and they said, yeah, we're doing that. Okay. The second question we typically ask organizations after the are you handling CUI is, do you have a copy of NIST 800-171 and 171 alpha? And when you did your self-assessment, did you follow 171 alpha? My marketing director will throw a stick in my head. I would say less than half of the people we talk to in this space say yes. The other half of them say, what's 171 alpha? Well, because they read 7012 and 7012 says NIST 800-171. Doesn't say 171 alpha, says 171. So they go down, they pull down NIST 800-171. They forget to read the preamble to NIST 800-171 that says this should be used with the 171 alpha as a companion guide for conducting the assessment. They miss that part because they skip from chapter 1 to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is where the controls are, and they skip all the preamble. They skip all the purpose, the relevance, the references. They skip it all. They go straight to 3.1, and they go, okay, 3.1.1 bowleg alpha, or they go 3.1.1 access control. Yes, we have it. No, you don't. You don't, because there's 6 parts to access control. And so we start asking some of those questions like, oh, so A is, number 2 is have the 171 and the 171 alpha. The other piece about it is that most organizations, I'll ask them, have you ever undergone an information system audit, like an ISO 27001, a CIS, an SCF, anything in that space? Most of them say no. Okay. Do you have experience in conducting IT audits? Well, no. Have you potentially considered having somebody help you prepare for your IT audit? No, we got a great MSP. Okay, does your MSP have an RP, an RPO, an RPA, a CCA, a CC, somebody that understands the language of assessments? Do they have anybody on their staff? No, but they've been doing IT for 20 years. Okay, guys,
clearly they're qualified.
Right. You are clearly setting yourselves up for a failure, because even the MSPs, when you ask them, did you get a copy of the 171 alpha? What's that? It's like, no, it's not a what's that. It's yeah, we've got it. We've got some questions about it, but we've got it. I tell most clients when they're looking at it, the 171 is like the syllabus that gets released at the beginning of the semester. It's interesting. Okay. But what you really want is the rubric for how that thesis has to be done. The rubric is the important piece. Your 171 alpha is the rubric. It's the cheat sheet, because it's an open book test. And if you go to 171 alpha and you open up 171 alpha, and it says right at the very top, your auditor is going to likely, you assess this control by interviewing, you examine these kinds of documents, you test these kinds of things. It's the cheat sheet. If you can actually go to it and say, yes, we're going to do an interview. Yes, when they examine, yes, we have an access control policy. Yes, we have a procedure for creating accounts. Yes, we have a procedure for deprovisioning accounts. It's all listed right there in the 171 alpha.
Yeah. And I want to just, I think you have this like kind of real world story, right? Of a 7-hour and 52-minute assessment success story. Do you have a moment to kind of touch on it?
So our DIBCAC, because C3PAOs, it's kind of funny. A C3PAO, to become a C3PAO, has to build a CMMC compliant environment and then have the DIBCAC come in and inspect us. And then we get our authorization to operate. Nobody asks us about our assessment processes or how we do that. That comes in 171 or ISO 17020 in 2 years. But anyway, so we have to build an environment. Now, when we decided to build the environment at Smithers, we decided that because Smithers is not an IT company, we didn't want to play in the IT game, and we didn't want the management of an environment like this to be a monkey that we had to throw off. Our IT division is very small. Even though we're a fairly large company, our IT divisions are fairly small because we're predominantly cloud-based. So as a result, when we went down this path, when we told leadership, look, we're not going to move Smithers, which is a 1,500 person company. We're not going to move all of Smithers to CMMC because the bulk of what we do has nothing to do with CMMC, a little bit of overkill. So we said, we're going to build a secure enclave. We're going to go Azure Gov. We're going to go GCC High, O365, GCC High, G5 licenses. We're going to make it a VDI environment. We're going to force a VPN, and we're going to force a client endpoint check. Even though that's not a requirement for a VDI, we built it pre-rule. And even though the rule came out, we said, you know what? We still don't want our auditors who are using the system from their own computers. We don't want that computer to be at risk. Even though it's technically out of scope, we're still like, we're not playing that game. So we built that environment. Now, truth in lending, as I said, Azure Gov, GCC High, G5 licenses, small environment. When we went through the DIBCAC inspection at the time, because we weren't doing assessments, per se in this space and weren't using the system yet, we had 2 users and 2 administrators. Why? Because we were the guys that built it, tested it, ran through the numbers, documented. Now, we did have a GRC tool. I'll give it up. It's future feed. We did have a GRC tool. We did have a rock solid MSP. And so we knew how to do assessments because that's what we do for a living. So when we built it, we basically made it so that when the DIBCAC came in and started each question, we had the policy and the procedure already uploaded. We had them on the screen. We also had the SSP there. We had this, back then it was an SRN. Now it's a CRM. We had it there, as well as our MSP had the screenshots of the objective evidence ready to go. So when you said, hey, show me your list of authorized users, I stood up, said authorized users, our HR list that is provided to our MSP manages them through Azure Active Directory and passes it to Entra. Screenshot. Azure Active Directory, standard users, admin users. Entra, standard users, admin users. MFA, standard users, averages, all the boom, boom, boom. The trick is that the DIBCAC came in and told us it would take 4.5 days to do our assessment. We started Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, and at 9:28 on Tuesday morning, we were done.
That's all.
Is that typical? No. Will the DIBCAC ever let that happen again? Absolutely not. They have made provisions. They will never let anybody get through the assessment that fast. But what it was
So smart.
Well, but it was a focus on understanding what the assessment process is. Now, we're an ISO certification house. We've been doing ISO certifications across 15 different standards for 33 years at quality assessments. So we know how to assess. So guess what? Yeah. We also know how to build systems to be assessed because we had the documentation there. There was nothing about our document. The DIBCAC did give us 5 minor documentations. We did have 1 documentation mistake, and I'm gonna argue we put it there just so the DIBCAC could find something. We did have the 1 documentation error that basically said, we will manage the user list in our SSP, and we had made the decision as we were building the system that was stupid because we would have to update the SSP every time we added a new person. We said, nope, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it through Azure Active Directory and the HR list. That's what we switched it to. We forgot to go back and change the SSP, but I like the argument that we did it so that the DIBCAC could find something.
100%.
That was the only thing that the DIBCAC found that was there. But that's because we spent about 3 months making sure the SSP, the policies, the procedures, the tools, the implementation, and the evidence all aligned across each other. So I told you what I was going to do. I told you how I was going to do it. I showed you what I was going to do, and I showed you I could do it. That was the assessment process. But
that is awesome.
Again.
Yeah. I think that it's so smart. I think it's very wise to do that. And if you're listening to this, watching this, I would highly encourage you to take similar steps. But Robert, we're also going to need to touch on one other thing here, and it's something I shared with you, I think a couple of months ago that I seen in the space happening. And, finding efficiency in that CMMC process, right? I'd like to get your take on fixed price versus not to exceed contracts and why the latter can be a better fit for complex assessments. Yeah.
So let me add those a third. There's time and materials, there's fixed price, and there's not to exceed.
Sure.
My concern of a time and materials is more applicable to consulting, where I'm actually building something for you and there's some variability to it. But even then, I would still say a time and materials contract is a risky proposition because there is no incentive on your consultant to get to an endpoint. Even before I joined Smithers and I did, normal consulting, I never did time and material contracting. I always did project contract. I built a project. I said the project will take X number of hours. Kind of focused on a not to exceed. If we are more efficient and you're more efficient with us, we'll get there. If you're not more efficient, game over.
It's going to cost you more.
Right.
Yeah.
The problem with a fixed price assessment is that a fixed price assessment, first off, anybody who does fixed price pricing will know that you take whatever you expect the top line to be and you add a 25% buffer to it because life happens. The other piece that I see about fixed price contracts is that this fixed price contracts, the scoping of the environment or the scoping of the assessment is usually poorly defined. We were at CEIC East last year. Company came up to us and said, "Hey, I just talked to one of your competitors." He says, "We're 35 people. They told us that just based on that number that our assessment would be $94,000. My group president nearly choked on her coffee and looked at me and says, "Why aren't we charging those kinds of fees?" And I says, "Because I can't justify $94,000 for a 35-person company." In reality,
That's crazy.
That assessment really should be more in the $30 to $35, maybe $40,000 range. A company that does a not to exceed contract is going to do like Smithers does. And that is that we're not just going to ask you the number of people. We follow the ISO 27006 process, which defines how to calculate audit duration. Now, a lot of people says ISO and CMMC aren't the same. Yeah, if they say that, they've actually never read ISO. If you've read ISO 27001, 27002, and 27006, you'll clearly see that actually ISO is a broader standard and actually delivers more around CIA than CMMC. CMMC is about protecting the confidentiality of government information. Has nothing to do with the integrity or the availability of your system or the protection of your own system. It's all about the government's data. But the reason I say that is that by following the 27006, we've got 45 years worth of experience from ISO around that standard is to calculate an audit. So when we go through the complexity factors, and there's about 17 of them that are listed in the 27006, when we go through those complexity factors, when I get on the back end and I give a client an estimate or not to exceed contract, I'm 99% confident that we're going to deliver it in that time or less. The reason that we like the not to exceeds, our clients like the not to exceeds, is that if I tell you your assessment is going to be a 10-day assessment, 2.5 days for the phase 1, 7.5 days for the phase 2, 1 day to write the report or a day and a half to write the report at the whole 9 yards, and I tell you it's going to be 11.5 days. If we get into the assessment and you do like we did with our DIBCAC inspection and you are rock solid and we get through the inspection, instead of taking 7.5 days, we get through it 5, you reap the benefit as the client because I adjust my downward and I say, okay, it only took me 5. I'm not charging you for 7.5. I'm going to charge you for 5. Now, does that annoy my auditor? Yeah, my auditor says, hey, there was 2.5 days of audit. I said, yes, but the advantage now is that you're done 2.5 days sooner. I can put you onto another audit. So as an auditor, don't look at it that way, number one. Number two, the other piece about it is that builds a certain level, not a certain level, that builds trust and it lends itself to transparency with your client.
100%.
Your client realizes that, hey, I'm not out. Yes, we are a company. Yes, we do have to make profit. However, we don't need to make profit by abusing or not being transparent with our clients. So when we do the assessments, we focus on being as efficient as we can. Now, that also gives us the ability to look at the client and say, hey, if you really want this assessment to go fast, you really want it to be efficient, have all of your data collected in advance. Have all of your policies and procedures. Do your self-assessment. Do your own internal controls and quality checks of your stuff. Have all the screenshots ready. Have the right people ready when we start the interviews. Nothing frustrates an auditor more than to show up and say, okay, your system security plan says Jason Miller is responsible for 3.1 through, 3.1.1 through 3.1.10, for the majority of the access control. Where's Jason? Oh, yeah, Jason got sick this morning and he's not going to be in until tomorrow afternoon. Okay, we reshuffle the schedule. Jason shows up tomorrow and says, okay, Jason, Let's take a look at your access control policy. Well, give me a few minutes. I got to go find it on the server.
Yeah.
It doesn't take too many of those before I get involved as the lead for the division. I get involved because I get a call from the audit that says, hey, look, I'm supposed to be, halfway through IA, integrity and identity and access management, IA. And I'm like, where are you? He says, I'm still on 3.1.5. Okay.
Right.
You should have been done like 3 hours ago with that. Well, here's the problems. That will typically precipitate a phone call to the client, say, okay, are you really ready for this assessment? And that's why we like the pre-assessment, and that's why we like the phase one to be done in advance. We work out those kinks during the pre-assessment. During the pre-assessment, we figure it out, we come back. The other advantage of not doing a fixed price is that under a fixed price contract, variability starts getting in the way. Things start happening. Under a fixed price contract, and I'm not saying any C3PAO does this, but let's just use human nature. When you do a fixed price contract, as you start watching the hours creep up because you didn't estimate it properly, you start to suddenly realize that you might actually run out of time, but because you gave the client a fixed price, you're going to eat it. So organizations will, human nature, you might start taking shortcuts. Not saying they're doing it. I'm just saying human nature says when your boss says, hey, dude, we figured this assessment was 100 hours. You're at 97 hours and you're still only 80% of the way done. Pick it up. Most not a good place for auditor to be. Now, can we have the same problem with a not to exceed? Absolutely. But at least with a not to exceed, unlike a fixed, we do a significant amount of effort up front to make sure that when I give that assessment, that it's going to be right. And right now, our estimating model is about a 92-93% accuracy rate across over a dozen assessments of multiple standards, by the way, not just at CMMC, but CMMC, ISO, and CIS. So we're confident. And when the model is not right, the 7 to 8% where it didn't predict the assessment properly, it's not right in that we predicted too much time.
Yeah.
So I predicted 8 days for the assessment. We got done in 6, or we got done in 7. So the client reaped the benefit. My model just said, hey, I should have predicted it at 7 or 8 or 7 or 6, not 8 like I did. To me, I'm okay with that. If it was under predicting, then I would dump the whole model and figure out a new model. But our model has about a 93% accuracy. And when it's wrong, it's wrong on the side of it benefits the client because we overestimated the duration.
Well, Mr. McVay, I have thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you today and going over this. I have no doubt that this information is going to help the CMMC community at large and maneuver through the questions that they have, and they could even come to you. I want to go through a few takeaways for the audience that is going to be watching this and consuming this information, and kind of wrap what we've covered today. So we've understood what CUI is, or controlled unclassified information, and how you either really need CMMC compliance or you don't. We've touched on that. We've touched on prioritizing pre-assessment, that prep. It's an investment into the right tools, making sure that you're consolidating your data so that you're efficient when you go into a assessment or the full-blown audit, right? We've also touched on avoiding those expensive mock assessments that we've called, waste and garbage. I'm excited that we've clarified that.
I will offer, if you have, to quote Ferris Bueller, if you have the means, do so. I mean, if you have the means and you really want to do it, do it. I just beg the question, why would you pay for the same level of service twice? I don't understand that. And I would also say, just be cautious by going down that path, because you might find yourself in your C3PO with an impartiality problem.
Yeah. I love that you quoted Ferris Bueller. Like, as a kid, I think I probably watched that movie 100 times. It's a good one. It's a good one. So if you're out there and you haven't seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, watch it. And then we also covered being realistic about the time and the cost of a CMMC assessment, considering the benefits of a not to exceed contract, if you're finding your C3PAO doesn't want to do a not to exceed contract, you might want to continue talking to other C3PAOs like Smithers. Give Smithers a call, or maybe somebody else. But you want to find somebody that has your best interest in mind as well as theirs. And so it's just like we're trying to showcase and be transparent to the community. Like, this is the style of how auditing happens out in the space, and making sure that you're equipped with that knowledge and you can go find, the best auditor for you. Robert, I want you to kind of just give us some final reflections on somebody's watched all of this. They see all the content. I want to thank you again for joining, but I also want to thank you for your military and your service to the United States. And like, give us your final reflections, on the evolving nature of CMMC.
I say this a lot to others in the ecosystem about this, and it's like, we talk about taxes. CMMC is a very complex thing right now. It will settle out in the next couple of years as the rules get solidified and the body of knowledge gets built and assessors come in and out, and it will stabilize. It will become nearly a commodity, but I would say it's going to take 5 to 10 years to become a commoditized assessment capability. So just bear with it. The amount of reading to stay up to date on CMMC is going to overwhelm most small businesses. You just don't have the bandwidth. You don't necessarily, and there's no ROI for your company on it. Reading and keeping up with the CMMC rules, it's the same reason that I send my taxes every year to a CPA, because he's the subject matter expert. I count on him. And I'm going to offer the same thing when you select your C3PAO. Your C3PAO should not just be a random throw a dart at the wall. Oh, we're going to go with Smithers. I would hope the dart would go there consistently, but it's not going to. But, call us, talk to us, ask us how we do our process, ask us whether or not we came about because of CMMC or we just added CMMC to a portfolio. There's only 6 companies that can say that. There's only 6 companies that are actually certification bodies under their own right and have been doing this for decades, versus the other 61 C3PAOs were all doing something not related necessarily to assessments when they became. Not saying that they're not good. I'm just saying, the experience is there. Part one.
Yeah.
The other piece about it is your relationship with your C3PAO is going to be long-term. There's a difference between picking a doctor when you go to the emergency room and picking a family doctor for your family. Okay. We typically go through 2 or 3 doctors, or just like people go to churches or hospitals or schools, you go through a couple before you find the one that fits your organization. Your C3PAO, you're going to be with them for a while. You're going to put a lot of trust in your C3PAO. So you want to make sure that you select the right C3PAO for your organization. Kind of a cultural fit, the understanding of business fit. Are they in your space? Those, intangible factors other than money. Because if you make your decision of your C3PO purely based on money, good luck. If you make it based on a relationship, how they treat you, how they prepare for you, whether or not they instill confidence or transparent in their processes, those are the kinds of things that will bear fruit for you the long term. So I would say the most important thing you can do, other than picking the right consultant to help you with it, is interview the right auditor. Talk to the right C3PAO until you're happy that this C3PAO is going to be a good fit for your organization.
Yeah. You touched on something there that I didn't even prompt you, and I'm so glad that you said it, is there's like 6 C3PAOs that have been in it and doing it, and we're doing it for a long time. And there's a whole bunch of others that have come on the scene. And I often relate this to is this, like, MSPs back in the day. I started my IT career in 1996. And so you had MSPs, managed service providers, right? And then all of a sudden, since they weren't talking about security, or they didn't have a security focus or what have you, all of a sudden MSPs they chose to evolve into an MSSP, and they added the S for security, to their stack. So they started selling, endpoint protection and firewalls and MFA, and they started selling all these products so that they could add the security portion to their management. And it's sort of funny that, here in the space, like, why do you want to choose somebody that added it to their portfolio because they realized that they could also make money at that other thing? Or do you want somebody that chose to get into this years ago because they were passionate about it, because they loved the space, because they knew that they were doing the right thing? There's just, I think the roots of how something started is so important to compare that against like where it's at today. Like, why are you guys this big of this? We have interviewed 5 C3PAOs at BitLyft. And we are most impressed with you. But it goes the comparison spreadsheet is who you are, what you are, your makeup, your passion, your knowledge, your skill set. All of those things are in there. And it was clear to me from the beginning that you did not add on or bolt on the CMMC to your portfolio of products because it was something else that you could make money at. And I think that's a big takeaway for people. I think people need to realize that, understand it, because it's going to reflect into the next several years of what you're going to be doing with your C3PAO.
And that's not to say that the C3PAOs that came about because CMMC and they chose to become a C3PAO without having any previous audit experience or anything like that. It's not to say that they can't do a good job for you as a C3PAO. In fact, I know several of them who are really rock solid C3PAOs. It's just that what we offer is that, the 6 of us that are inspection bodies or certification bodies, we've been under either ILAC, GLOBAC, or ANAB for decades, who've assessed all of our processes and procedures. Our readiness to be ready for 17,020, most C3POs are finding that's going to be a 1 to 2 year proposition for them. In our case, it was the changing of about 72 internal documents that we already had for our 17121. So for us, it was just when CMMC came about, it was you know what, we're already doing ISO 27001. We're already doing 14 other ISO standards. This is just another standard. Tuck it up underneath our umbrella. We know how to do it. We've got all the processes and procedures in place. And I would say the other 5 C3PAOs that are inspection bodies and certification bodies, they're in the same boat. They're like, yeah, we do this. We know how to do it. It's easy. We bolt it on and run because it's just another standard. And like I said, the C3PAOs that are not inspection bodies and certification bodies, they're going to eventually be inspection bodies. They're going to grow. They're going to improve. And just like, we said, the ecosystem's going to settle out. While it's the wild, wild west, you pick where you want to drop in and figure it out. And just because you picked a C3PO today does not mean you stick with them. If you don't like something about them, change, reach out, talk to other C3POs, find the right cultural fit for your organization.
That's great, man. So thanks again so much for joining the Miller Mindset. Before we depart here, where can people find you? How can they get in touch with you?
Smithers.com is our address. Mine is robert.mcvay@smithers.com, and it's just SMITHERS.com. Pretty straightforward. We're pretty predominant out there. We're also on the C3PAO page in the ecosystem. So awesome. Happy to engage. And we have a very ecosystem education mindset here. I would say probably about a third of my time every week is just having random companies, random organizations reach out to us and say, hey, what do you think about this? How do you guys do assessments? I have one client right now who's called me probably a dozen times. How do I talk to the government about my CUI? And he's relying on the fact that I was an acquisition officer for 25 years in the Army. So he's like, what do I tell my contracting officer? Okay, here's the kinds of things you can talk to with your contracting officer. So yeah, happy to help and happy to have joined us. Glad to be able to contribute. And, if anybody wants, just please reach out to me at any time, ping me, and I'll try to answer your question to the best of my ability.
Yeah, that's awesome, Robert. Thank you again so much for your time, your effort, your dedication to the space. I love that about you guys, and interacting with several folks at Smithers now, You guys absolutely have a education first mindset and not a sales first mindset. That culture internally, you can tell, is heavy and deep across the organization. So much appreciate that, because most of us out here in the space are trying to figure things out first before we get sold something.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
that's so important. But then it's like, once we do truly understand the depth and breadth of what you guys are doing, then it's an easy sale at that point. I'm basically telling you to, send me the documents and paperwork, because I'm super pleased and I'm happy and I'm comfortable, So, but without further ado, thank you so much. I've taken up a ton of your time today, and I greatly appreciate you being part of Miller Mindset. And I look forward to chit-chatting with you again soon in the future. Hope you have a great rest of your May. I'm sure it's a busy time for you. And we'll see you again soon. To all our visitors and watchers of this video, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. Be on the lookout for our next Miller Mindset. We're going to be speaking with somebody very exciting in the space, and I won't give it away, but stay tuned for more. Thank you, everyone.